Hey everybody, welcome back to the Chronicles of Aguna, coming to you from Emirates Stadium shortly after Arsenal have been beaten by Villarreal in a pre-season friendly. We lost the game 3-2 and we lost on penalties 4-3 as well. Not the ideal prep for the season, and there's still a lot of concerns when you look at the performance. You know, we started with a little bit more intensity, I felt, today than we showed in some of the other games, but it didn't last very long, and we never really got into any rhythm or any flow, and never really had the tempo in our game to cause Villarreal as many problems as we'd like. On top of that, defensively, we look incredibly vulnerable, which has been a bit of a theme in pre-season, and I can understand why people are worried and concerned by that. But I do think you always have to just kind of curb those reactions, because you always have to remember that there's nothing at stake here other than building the players back up to the fitness levels they need to be at to really compete when the Premier League season starts. And it's easy to look at tonight and say the players are miles off it, but you'll be surprised how much they can improve in terms of conditioning over the course of the next week and a half when they really ramp up and step up preparation. So I'm not like massively worried, pressing the panic button or anything like that, but you know, there is cause for concern in a few areas, and we're going to touch on some of those areas tonight, rather than sort of running through the way the game went and the order of proceedings. I don't think there's much use in that, because when you're changing players constantly, when you're making 5-6 substitutions at a time, a game's flow is going to be disrupted. There isn't going to be that rhythm that you're sort of expecting in the big games, when there are less changes and when there is obviously something at stake. The big positive from tonight is no doubt Max DOWMAN, again, 15 years old, coming on and showing himself to be the best player on the pitch. And not just by a little bit, but by a country mile. And you can tell me that I've got to stay calm and that we've got to stay chilled and relaxed, and we've got to manage the hype around this lad as much as you want. But at 15 years old, this guy is already showing himself to be a generational talent. And we have got him at our football club, and we're incredibly fortunate to have him at our football club. We've got the opportunity to nurture him, to develop him, and hopefully he'll represent us for many, many years to come. But what he did for me tonight when he came on the pitch was showed the importance of beating your man in those wide areas, and what that can do in terms of opening up spaces and creating opportunities for those around you. I bet you that Victor Gyökeres wishes that he was on the pitch tonight at the same time as Max DOWMAN, because I'm almost certain that DOWMAN would have beat his man and picked him out at some point, and he might have got his first goal. So there's a real importance in being able to beat your man, and Saka struggled to do it tonight and has done at times during this pre-season. Gabriel Martinelli struggles to do it at times as well. And we've had a lot of debate and discussion around those wide positions over the course of the summer. And Max DOWMAN is not really helping the case of those other wingers that I've just mentioned there. I'm not saying that you've got to get rid of them or bin them based on pre-season performances, but Max DOWMAN is showing you that if you can beat your man in that area, you can create things, you can open teams up. And that's really, really important. Bukayo Saka, for me, doesn't look anywhere near his best. That's a cause for concern. But again, you just have to kind of trust that by the time the season comes around, he'll be ready to go, and he'll be in a position to be performing at his best level. Gabriel Martinelli, still a bit of a concern for me. We've had a lot of back and forth over the summer about getting in that kind of left winger. Doesn't feel to me like we're going to get a specialist left winger in. And we'll talk about the Eberechi Eze situation on tomorrow's main podcast, because I've got some thoughts on that have just developed over the last few hours and are based on some conversations I've had. So we'll talk about that on the main pod. That's your reason to tune in. Victor Gyökeres, of course, made his Arsenal home debut today, but it's clear that he's nowhere near the physical level yet. It's understandable. He's behind everyone else in terms of his pre-season training. I felt like he was kind of on the peripheries of the game, for the first 30, 35 minutes or so. But then he seemed to figure out that actually if he drifts into that slightly left of centre position and into that half space, into that channel, he might get on the ball a little bit more. And he did on a couple of occasions, and he managed to engineer a couple of half chances as a result of that. So that's something that, he's going to have to feel his way into. He's going to have to understand, and he's going to develop a better understanding of as time goes on. That means that Gabriel Martinelli can drift into those more central areas as a result of that as well. And that might actually work for both of them. But what I liked about that from Gyökeres was that he found a solution. He didn't just stand up top like a dummy and wait for things to come to him. He went searching for a solution, because for him, it's about goals, goals, goals. And it's really encouraging to see him show that in-game intelligence. The instruction might have been stay central. And there will be times where we need him to do that for tactical reasons, because it opens space and creates room for others to operate in. But I'm glad that he went and found that solution in game to get himself on the ball and get himself involved a little bit more. We ended up back with Marino up front in the second half. Not sure exactly what the deal is with Kai Havertz. Haven't gone in for the press conference yet with Mikel Arteta. So if I hear anything on that, and I'm sure you'll hear it before we get tomorrow's podcast out, then we'll bring you an update on that. But he was down on the side of the pitch after the game with his teammates in his tracksuit. So he did come, he did arrive here with the team, I was told, but obviously didn't play a part in the match. If it is a problem, I don't imagine it's anything particularly serious. The big concern for me tonight was that we looked really sloppy and vulnerable defensively. And then I'm not sure that there's much of an excuse for that. You know, White, Saliba, Kivior and Miles Lewis-Skelly was your back four at the start of the game. And barring one or two changes, that's pretty much been the defence that started games in pre-season. Yet we keep getting sliced open on the transition really, really easily. We didn't react to certain situations within our penalty box well enough and quick enough today, which led to the goals for Nicolas Pepe, who, of course, returned here tonight and didn't look like the worst winger on the pitch. That's all I'm going to say on that one. But look, we've got to defend better. We've got to find that structure again that we normally have at the back, which makes us so difficult to beat. But as I say, there's no excuses for it, because that defence of White, Saliba, Kivior and MLS could quite easily start at Old Trafford, depending on how fast Gabby and Timber get up to speed. People will say creativity was an issue again. I'm not sure if it was creativity tonight or a bit of a tempo issue. It didn't feel like we had enough tempo in our game. I suppose the two are linked in some way, but I think a lack of sharpness and an inability to sustain that intensity from a physical standpoint is impacting us there. And you'd imagine that when people get a bit fitter and a bit sharper, that'll be less of a problem. Last thing I'll kind of say on tonight's game is obviously Noni Madueke made his debut. I should mention that Christian Norgard showed he's a set-piece monster and perfect for this Arsenal team, and a dream for Nicolas Jova by heading in the first half. Credit to him on that. But again, we'll touch on the ins and outs of it in a little bit more detail on tomorrow's full show. But I do very, very quickly want to touch on Noni Madueke, because, look, I was very critical of the sign-in. I couldn't make sense of the sign-in. I still feel like he's got it all to do in terms of proving to us that he was the right acquisition, especially if we're not going to go out and get another specialist winger in, which is how it feels at the moment. He did miss a penalty in the shootout, the penalty that decided the shootout, but that's neither here nor there. It's a pre-season friendly. Who cares? I am glad, though, that he got a good reception when he came on, and he did get a good reception from the Arsenal faithful, because whatever you think about him, whatever your opinion on him was when Arsenal were first linked and when that deal was being done, he's an Arsenal player now, and you need to draw a line under that and get behind him and support him. That doesn't mean you can't criticize. That doesn't mean you can't analyze his performances or scrutinize them. But obviously, there's a level of respect that I think deserves to be shown now, simply because he's an Arsenal player. So not great preparation for the new season. We've got one more game to go on Saturday here against Athletic Bilbao. Hopefully we put in a better display on Saturday, and one that will give people a bit more encouragement going into that game at Old Trafford on the 17th. But there's still clearly plenty of work for this Arsenal squad to be doing. We've got to find a way of unlocking Victor Gyökeres' potential. I do think the midfield we started with was problematic for us. And again, we'll discuss that in more detail on tomorrow's pod, and that contributed at times to the lack of creativity. The balance in that midfield that we saw, for me, isn't right. We'll get into that, as I say, in more detail tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in. Leave a like, subscribe, all of that wonderful stuff. And if you're listening on audio, make sure to leave us a review. We'll be back tomorrow with a full episode, and we'll break it all down in a lot more detail with a very special guest. Until then, take care. Goodbye.